Welcome to the Candid Comms podcast. If you're looking for practical and inspirational ideas to help you thrive in internal communication, you're in the right place. I'm your host, international communication consultant, trainer and mentor, Rachel Miller. Through this podcast, I'll share my experience with you so you can increase your skills, knowledge and confidence on all things internal communication related. Welcome to the show. On this week's episode, I have an incredibly special guest to share with you. It's the producer of the Candid Comms podcast, Debbie West. Debbie, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much. I don't think I've ever been called incredibly special guest.
So you are. Well, if it wasn't for you, the show wouldn't go out. So you are incredibly special. Wow. I thought it would be good to share a behind the scenes look at the Candid Comms podcast and what goes into making a podcast and how it comes to appear on podcast players every Sunday.
Yeah.
So that's the intention behind the episode this week, to close season 1. Can you believe we're closing season 1?
I honestly can't. It feels like yesterday we were talking about it conceptually, and now we're about to push the button on episode 15, and this is episode 16.
Yeah.
Can you believe all those weeks have gone by?
No, I can't. And we've gone through lockdown, we've gone through all sorts, haven't we?
Yeah.
So in today's show, we're going to be lifting the lid on podcasting, what it is, how it works, how I found it, how you've found it. And as you can expect, it will be a candid conversation. So we'll be very honest.
Absolutely.
I have asked you so many questions about podcasting, and I have got stuck and broken things so many times, and I have a feeling we'll probably talk about those things today.
Yeah, I think we should, because that is the candid part of it, right? Because it's lovely to see the produced episode and see the beautiful photography and the gloss, and that's amazing, and it looks and sounds fantastic, but it's all the hard work that goes into it that really counts, isn't it? So I think that's what's important to talk about. Yeah.
Sure. So do you want to steer our conversation today?
Yeah, can I?
Yeah.
Because I'm really intrigued why you've retaken up podcasting, because I know you used to be a keen podcaster a long time ago, and then you appear on nearly everybody's podcast in internal communications, but you didn't have your own. And I remember asking you on my podcast why you weren't podcasting and whether it's something you would take up.
I did have a podcast. I had the All Things IC podcast, and it was under the godfathers of podcasting, Shel Holtz and Neville Hobson. It was under the FIR, for Immediate Release Podcast Network. And this is back in, I think it's 2014. I'm not exactly sure, 2013, 2014, because it was before I had my boys, and I had my twins in 2014. And I really enjoyed it. I enjoyed all the things that I love about internal comms, meeting people, interviewing, finding out their stories. And I used to record that podcast every week. And then I had my babies, and I thought, my house is never going to be quiet again. And it was spot on. So in the back of my mind, it's something that I did really enjoy. I found it quite complicated, the way that I used to do it before, because I didn't have a you. I didn't. Honestly, it was so tricky. And my poor husband, John, we used to upload the RSS feed to Libsyn, and it was all this really technical stuff that I didn't know how to do. And I relied on him helping me get the show out. And I decided to pause, and then had my babies. And I love appearing on podcasts. I love sharing stories about internal comms, and I enjoy being interviewed and speaking. And it was in the back of my mind. And whenever I've been asked over the last 6 or 7 years, my answer has always been, even in a blog post I wrote actually in October 2020, where I collated all of the PR and comms podcast. And I said, I've been asked whether I'm going to relaunch my podcast. Never say never. And I actually updated that in 2021. I went back into that blog post and I said, well, I did say never say never. I did then go on to relaunch it. I think the reason why I relaunched it was mainly really from our conversations when you challenged me to say, why aren't you doing your own podcast? Because you are appearing on other people's. And I was nervous. I was nervous to do it. I think I wondered how it would fit in with everything else that I'm doing. And I think the techie side was, I had the hangover of the concerns from before about it is complicated to do it, but the world has moved on in those 6 or 7 years, and technology has moved on in those 6 or 7 years. And I remember talking to you and saying, So I've been reflecting, Debbie, and I think I'm going to do it. And you said, do you remember what you said to me?
No, you tell me. What did I say?
You said, I've been waiting for you to say that, Rachel.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I definitely was. I remember, it was probably 2-3 years ago when you came on Be a Bigger Fish. And I remember thinking at the time, this is just such a good channel for you because you are a natural storyteller and your empathy is completely genuine. And I think that translates so well in audio. So I'm delighted that you've taken up podcasting again because I think it's perfect for you.
Thank you.
Yeah, and really, really proud of being involved in the series. I think it's been amazing podcast series. So, congratulations on it.
Thank you.
Yeah.
It wouldn't have happened without you holding my hand, I think. Let's think about the techie side because it was super complicated before when I was doing it a good few years back. And shall we share what we do? Would that be helpful, do you think?
I think so, yeah. Well, the whole end to end of how we make a podcast. That's a really good idea. Yeah. Okay.
Shall I share all the mistakes that I've made?
Oh, definitely. They're the most interesting part. That's what keeps us going.
So just for context, I relaunched my podcast in January 2021. We were in lockdown here in the UK. And as we're recording this in May 2021, the lockdown is lifting. It's on the horizon, but it's not there yet. So we are still in lockdown. But when we started, children weren't at school. And I have an 8-year-old daughter and 6-year-old twin sons. I've never spoken about actually on this podcast, not for any intentional purpose to not talk about them, but it's not a podcast about me being a mum. So my house was even noisier. If I thought it was going to be noisy when I had a toddler before my babies were born, before the twins were born. Oh my goodness me. My household in January 2021 was incredibly noisy to the point where there wasn't a quiet space to record. So I came up with the idea of recording in my car. And I remember being really excited about this and saying to Debbie, I found a space that's quiet. And like, where? I said, in my car, sitting on the driveway. So I fashioned a sound booth out of baby seats, out of all their car seats, which was pretty effective. To start with, actually, let's be really honest and be really candid. To start with, I set up a studio in the boot.
Yeah.
Because I've got a big car because I've got three young children. And I set up the studio and I had a sound shield and I had a microphone and I had the pop shield and I was just about to close the boot and I realised, so the trunk if you're based outside the UK, I realised that once I shut that door, I wouldn't be able to get out.
I remember that.
Do you remember? Yeah. I remember messaging you going, I've just saved myself from locking myself
in the boot. Yeah.
So then I relocated to the back seats where all the baby seats were and then shut the door. But what I'd failed to realise was that the child lock was on. So I still, I mean, listener, it's a very glamorous,
It is glam, it's all glam.
Seamless recording. So I'd locked myself in my car where I couldn't get out. So I had to very ungraciously crawl through to the driver's seat and release myself from the car. And I recorded 2 episodes successfully in the car.
Yeah.
I think it was episode 1 and 2. And then I tried to record episode 3 and something happened, Debbie, between the house and my car with the microphone.
Oh, yes. I remember this so well. Yes, it did. Something got accidentally tweaked.
It did.
On the journey.
And we don't know what it was. We think it was there's lots of buttons on this. I use a Blue Yeti microphone and I don't know how to use it properly. Debbie's just adjusted it because we're recording for the first time in person.
Yeah.
For the first time in 16 episodes. And something got knocked. And what's the word you use to describe it when it goes really high?
It was hot. It's called hot. When it's effectively, when you record too loud, you say it's too hot. And yeah, it was a very hot recording.
It was 2 episodes, wasn't it? I remember being really proud of myself that I'd locked myself, well, not that I'd locked myself in the car, that I was in the car and I'd recorded 2 episodes because we try and batch content. So we try and get ahead of ourselves. I mean, there was 1 week where I lost my voice, so we were really grateful that I already had an episode in the can, as you call it.
In the can, yeah, it's good.
But I'd knocked the microphone somehow, and therefore we had 2 episodes that had been recorded, but they were really, the audio was really not ideal, very steaming hot. So bless you, you managed to salvage it, and I didn't have to re-record the episodes. I was really grateful for. But in between recording, it started to rain. And I remember messaging you going, I've managed to record one. But because I was in a car, I was essentially in a metal box sat on my driveway, and the rain was lashing down on the roof, and you could hear it. It sounded like I was trapped in a metal box that was being rained on. So we had to try it again for another day. But I mean, you learn, right?
Absolutely, and you can't always control the sound environment.
No, right. Should we keep that one in? We're currently recording in the All Things IC Hub, which is my office in West London, and there are quite a few, as you would expect in urban London, there are quite a few police sirens. And Debbie and I were joking this morning that you've got so many clips of me going, oh, police siren, when I come here to record.
I've got a folder full of apology clips. Yeah, it's brilliant. Yeah. But there's so much noise. And we sat down to record just now, and then we had to pause while the local brewery unloaded all of their kegs all the kegs, all the metal kegs have been clanging outside. So I think you have to adapt, right? This is the beauty of working as internal communicators, because we're used to adapting and we're used to figuring stuff out as we go. I've learned so much in the past few months about just how to record a podcast and what to do. And I remember it felt huge before I started. I had to think about content and think about how to structure it. Should we talk about that? So I remember we had a conversation and you came up with a comment which felt off the cuff, but I don't know if it was, where you said we need to think about, what you want people to take away. It's probably something to know, something to do, something to think about. And I remember saying, you're a genius. That's perfect. That is. I wish you could see Jimmy's reaction to me. That was so nice. But that structure resonates with listeners because only this week I had a comment from Fajita Hearn, who messaged on Instagram to say that she really enjoys the episodes because she always leaves something to do, something to think about and something to know. And I thought that was really nice. And so I guess there are lots of little things that go into that. So obviously there's the magic of three, and it's got that comfy feeling that there's just three things that they can take away. But also it's really helpful, particularly with audio, because you may not be able to sit down and write notes with audio. You may have to try and carry those ideas in your brain, which we're not used to doing anymore. So actually remembering something and keeping it top of mind is a bit of a challenge for us now, because we're used to writing everything down or taking a picture of it on our phone. But just having those three really easy hooks makes it easy for people to remember those going forwards, because they know every time they listen to your podcast, they're listening out for those three hooks. So what are they going to know, and what are they going to be able to do, and what can they think about? It's a really helpful way for people to access the content and then remember the content so they can use it. And I know it's super important to you that the content's really practical. So, it's something that people can actually build into their professional practice, which is brilliant. That's a brilliant effect for a podcast to have on somebody, that it's something they can actually use. So that's why those three hooks are in there. So.
I think while I'm recording that's helpful as well, because you're right. I think I don't have loads of notes in front of me because I fidget all the time, as you know. I'm always wiggling around in my chair or clicking my pen, which is really unhelpful for Debbie. So I normally have a post-it note in front of me with those three headings. I find having those 3 points on a post-it note is incredibly helpful because it keeps the structure and it keeps the content flowing at a pace, and it provides structure to quite abstract topics. For example, a recent episode I recorded on values. There are so many avenues you can explore. So I find it keeps the episode short, because I could talk about these topics for hours. Very passionate about them.
Well, and it's even worse when we get together, right? Because we've had a conversation for 2 hours leading up to this.
Yeah, it's true. I think it's finding a convention that works in terms of how do we keep to time and how do we keep focus and how do we keep structured. And I think so the majority of the podcast is solo shows, and then every 5 episodes, and we never really said it would be every 5, but it was in our planning process, is an interview episode. And very intentionally with season 1, I've chosen in-house internal communicators to share their stories and to be candid. And I've really enjoyed those conversations.
Yeah, they're super. It's lovely to hear you in conversation, and it's lovely to hear those people as well and what they bring with them, and their unique perspective and their experience. And I really love interview podcasts. But the solo episodes are so powerful too, because obviously you can keep on track yourself with what you want to get from those episodes and what you want to share. So I love that balance, 4 solo episodes and then a guest conversation to sort of tuck into, and that feels like the right sort of pulse. Nice, to be honest. Yeah. Also, in between those interview podcasts, it gives us time to arrange those properly and to give them proper consideration and think about what you'd like to cover in those conversations. Because likewise, the conversation could go anywhere, but we've given ourselves that time to talk to the guest and to really think thoroughly about what we'd like to have a conversation about.
Shall we share how we do that? So particularly thinking about your role as a producer, I've never had a producer before, and that feels very grown up and exciting. So do you maybe want to share what your role is and what that means for Candid Comms?
Yes, definitely. So I think I perform the role of both editor and producer for Candid Comms. In the role of producer, that really is around organising all the wraparound. So it's not necessarily just what happens in the soundtrack, but it's how do you source guests? How do you have that conversation with the guest to make them feel welcomed to the podcast and so that they can contribute really well? And then how do we do things like structure the season, structure each episode? And so it's all of that, all of the wraparound around the actual content of a podcast that a producer can help you to take care of, basically. And those things are, those are the things that if you're not experienced and you don't expect to have to deal with them, they can trip you up if you just set off and press record and then wonder how you achieve all of these different elements that go into actually creating a successful series. So
I remember reading recently that most podcasts only last for 3 or 4 episodes. So there's lots of podcasts out there, but most only stay the course for 3 or 4 episodes. And I wonder whether it's because they don't have somebody doing exactly what you're doing. The role that you play is really critical to, particularly when we're working with guests as well. It's really nice, the pre-call that you have with people to set questions with them and understand any fears they may have. And then when we do the recording, so normally for solo episodes, I record myself and I record it into a microphone, into my phone or into my laptop, and then I send you the files. But when we do a guest episode, you host that recording for us, and we do that via Zoom, and the 3 of us are on that call, and then you're silent in the background. So we have a good chat, the 3 of us to start with, and then you drop off the call, it looks like, but you're there very much guiding us sort of in the background. I like that. I feel like that works really well because I can see, because it's a video call, I can see the guest, and I like that. I can't sometimes forget that we're being recorded. It just feels like we're having a conversation, and I love it.
Yeah, and that's the aim, really. It is meant to be, and it is Candid Comms, right? So it's meant to be just a real conversation that we happen to capture. But it's a smart conversation, so it's not just a random conversation. We've thought about what would be the most appropriate things to talk about, appropriate for the guest to share, but also appropriate for the listener to then want to listen to and to learn from. So it is like an intelligent, real conversation.
And I like that. Can we have that as a strapline?
Yeah.
An intelligent, real conversation. Love it. Love it. And we're in planning mode now for season 2 as well, which I'm really excited about. And we've got some great guests lined up, which I'm really looking forward to having conversations with. And we're not going to share any hints. We'll keep all that under wraps for season 2.
Yeah.
From my perspective, thinking about Candid Comms, I remember when you and I were thinking about naming the podcast. That was really tricky. I found it really difficult to name, and I think I had a long list on my phone. I think we got up to 54 names at one point.
There were a lot of names.
It was hard, wasn't it? I think the intention behind it was really clear to me, but I didn't know how to name it.
Yeah, I totally feel your pain because I am trying to name a podcast myself right now, and it's much easier, I think, to help somebody else with that sometimes because there's so much that you want to say and you want to encapsulate all of that in the name of your podcast, which is sort of humanly impossible. But you had a very unique approach to naming your podcast in the end, didn't you?
Was that unique?
I would say so,
You think so? We had so many, didn't we? We kind of whittled it down to a short list, and then I tested it, and I asked people, and I asked clients and people who've worked with me, who know me very well, and said, because you know me, and you know how I work, and you know what's important to me, does this feel like me? Does this feel like something you would expect me to do, and you would expect me to be aligned with? And I shared the shortlist of about 4 or 5 with the lovely Chloe Maple, who is a client of mine. And she came back to me and she said, any of these would work, but what I feel like you're known for is Candid Comms. And I remember looking at that and just seeing that sentence and just going, that's it. That's what we're trying to achieve. And I remember feeling really quite emotional when I read that, and just the word candid in a word encapsulates everything that I'm about, and trying to, bust myths on internal comms and be really open and be very transparent about no one's got this sorted. We are all figuring it out. And when I've just read that word, it gave me goosebumps. You know what I'm like? I'm such an emotional, reactive person. I think I've said on the podcast multiple times this season, oh, that's given me goosebumps, because I do react physically to things like that. And when I saw that word, I remember messaging you and going, we've got it.
It was that moment when you think, that is absolutely perfect. And I think I've noticed you use that word more in your speech and in your writing.
That's interesting.
Yeah. But it's like that cognitive bias, isn't it? Once you see the word and you realise how important it is, you then see the word everywhere.
Yeah, that's true.
But no, I think it's a brilliant title. And it really does convey the spirit of the podcast, because it really is candid. Like you definitely share candidly exactly what you would do in the situations you're talking about, which is why it's so powerful. You don't hold anything back. You tell people exactly what you would do. And those conversations we've had with guests, they have been genuinely candid. And that's amazing. It's great to capture that.
I feel like they go deeper. I feel like it gives me the permission to say, I think it was with Matt Batten in episode 5, when we were having a conversation and I said, come on, Matt, this is candid. And it enabled me to go deeper with him and say, what was that really like? And then he said, oh, okay, because we're being candid. And it was really beautiful. He reacted so lovely to it. But I think it almost gives me a mechanism to create the conditions where we know what to expect. Yeah. We are going to be candid. We're not going to have conversations where everything's shiny and perfect and brilliant, because it wouldn't be called Candid Comms. It would be called something else, working authentically and honestly and lifting the lid on the reality of how hard internal communicators work and how hard and challenging our work can be. It can be equally rewarding and amazing, but also it's tough.
It is, and it is one of those roles, internal communications, as we know from the popularity of, blogs about people who come along and tell you to comms it up and work your magic and all of that. It's like, we know from the inside how much effort goes into something to make it look effortless. Yeah. It's more effort to make something look easy than it is to make something clunky, right? And
so true.
And I think that's why the internal comms community is so strong in itself, is because we recognise in each other the effort that we all individually make in our different contexts. And that's great. I love that about this community.
I think there's quite an openness in terms of talking about mistakes and failure as well, which is why I love the Internal Miscommunications podcast with Keith Riley and Erica Goodwin, because that's personified, that openness to say everybody is mucking up and we're going to talk about it. And what can we learn from that? Which I just love as a gorgeous format. I love that.
Yeah, it's brilliant. And talking about work and the effort that goes into it, would you describe making the podcast as a lot of work and a lot of effort? Because I know podcasters suffer the same injustice as internal communicators, that people think podcasts happen by magic. Does it feel like a lot of effort, Rachel, or is it something you really enjoy?
I do really enjoy it. It is a lot of effort, but it's enjoyable effort, if that makes sense. So I take it very seriously. When you work in internal communication, you are so visible, and everything you do and everything you write and you say is very visible. And when you choose to record a podcast, you are putting yourself out there to be quite visible and be quite vulnerable. And it deserves the time, money and effort that you invest in it. I think it's important to, if I want to do something, I want to do a good job. So it's enjoyable work. You make it a lot easier. Because I think if it was left down to me and I'd have recorded all those episodes really hot and then I called them in and then looked at them on the screen and realised they were wrong, I would just have to record them all over again, and I wouldn't know what I was doing, and I would be doing best guess, which is what I did when I did my podcast, my original podcast. It took me a very, very long time because I didn't really know what I was doing, and I was winging it, as we all are, I think, in most of the work that we do. But I didn't want to wing this. I wanted to do it properly because it felt important to me to ask for help and to ask the expert for help. This is what you do, and that beautiful combination you have, which is why I love working together, where you have learning and development backgrounds, you have all of your audio skills and expertise, and you have your online course expertise. We work together a lot, and the work, I feel like I can now invest time in thinking about the structure of the episodes and the content, and I know that the hard work and the lifting and shifting of the audio files and everything else that you do. So the producing the headliner clip. So with every episode we have like a video clip where there's a voiceover and there's words that go onto that. You do. So that shared load makes it not feel like a huge lot of work for me. It fits in. We've got into the stride now, 16 episodes in. It fits around what we do, and it fits around the other work and commitments that I have for all Things IC's clients. So I wouldn't change it. I'm really happy with how that relationship works, because it is that shared responsibility.
Yeah, and I love the way that it works together, and we do exchange ideas over everything that we create, and we all of the time, and we have that running dialogue about how to tweak it and improve it and how to direct it so it really achieves what you want it to achieve. I love that. I love the way that we do that together. You mentioned earlier about the number of podcast series that start and then don't go anywhere, and it's a phenomenon called pod fade.
Is that a whole thing?
It is, yeah, it's a whole thing, pod fade. So I think it's as much as maybe 70% of podcast series that suffer from pod fade, where somebody will publish. It's usually about 6 or 7 episodes. So most people start a podcast with this great idea and they're burning to tell the world about this idea, and then after 6 episodes they've done that, and then they realise how much hard work it is, and then maybe something's fallen over and they didn't know how to fix it, and then it gets a bit like involved, and then they stop doing it because it's not as easy as it looks. It's not as easy as it looks. So to actually get past the pod fade stage and keep publishing, that in itself puts you in the top 30%.
Wow.
So that's really impressive,
take that.
right?
Shall we talk about because the original plan was to publish on a Monday. This was the plan.
Yes.
And that felt like an achievable goal, to publish weekly and publish on a Monday. And then we did that for the first couple of episodes. And then I found to publish on a Monday meant lining it up to go live at midnight on a Sunday night. And I would get to about 11 o'clock on a Sunday night and be really tired and think, I didn't want to automate it. And I wanted to see it go live, and then it gets pulled through to Apple and Spotify and all the different podcasting platforms. And then I decided to think about releasing it early, and I was looking at feedback from listeners about where they listen to the episodes, and people started to say, I save them up, or it comes out on a Monday and I save it for the weekend and I listen to it on a Sunday, or I listen to it while I'm walking my dog, or I listen to it while I'm having a run. And then we made the decision pretty early on. I think it was like episode 4. From episode 4 onwards of season 1, we then released on a Sunday. So it goes live on a Sunday morning. So now I'm up at midnight on a Saturday night, which is fine because it's Saturday night. And I line it up to go live. So it hits at 1 minute past midnight. So very early Sunday morning. And that seems to have really resonated with listeners. And I'm really proud of that, because I know that I'm accompanying people making their Sunday lunch. I know that I'm out with you where you're pushing young babies in prams on a Sunday, while you're having a run. At least 3 or 4 listeners now listen to it in the bath. Mm-hmm. So hello to you if you're listening to us in the bath. And I like that, because what's happened over the cadence, the rhythm of the podcast over the last 12 weeks, particularly from episode 4 onwards, has been people have fitted it into their weekend routines. And I don't know what the industry thinking is about the best day to release a podcast, but it's probably not a Sunday, is it?
Well, I think the most popular day for podcast episodes to go out is a Monday. So what happens then is you've got a lot of competition, but also what happens when it's a really popular day is that maybe is the day most people log in to look at what's new on a Monday, because they're used to lots of episodes coming out on a Monday. So I tried different days of the week when I was publishing my podcast to see what worked. And there's a balance, and I think you've taken the right approach, which is to listen to your listeners and to interpret the feeling around the community that listens to your podcast, because every podcast has got its own community, and so that community will respond differently. And you did exactly the right thing. Your community was saying to you, this is the context in which I want to hear this podcast, so you've put your podcast into that context. That's the right thing to do.
I find that most Sunday mornings, if I'm up with the children, it's 6:30, 7. If I look at the stats, so it's gone live at midnight, so it's been up and available for 6 or 7 hours, and it's normally had about 70 or 80 listens already, which I'm always amazed by, because obviously I'm based in the UK, but it's a real international audience. So there are people who are listening while I'm sleeping, and it's really nice to wake up knowing that the episode's just gone out and knowing that people have automatically, straight away listened to it and have started to give me feedback. I love that. I love knowing that I'm starting the day knowing that people are listening. And then throughout Sunday, I'll get various messages from people saying, I'm cooking the dinner or whatever they're doing. And I love that, because to know that I'm in the earbuds of internal communicators as they're finishing off their weekend and maybe planning for the week ahead, and I'm there to support them and giving them advice and guidance, is something I'm really proud of, because it feels like the Sunday is a good day to help set them up for success, hopefully, for the week ahead.
Yeah, absolutely. And as important as that is, it's equally important to remember that somebody could listen to your podcast episode at any time and in any place. And that's the great thing about it. So you've found a sort of sweet spot for publishing, but also each of your episodes could be the first episode that somebody listens to, and they'd still recognise it was you, and they'd still get a sense of what that podcast is there for. And that's the important thing not to forget as well. So it's easy to kind of think, because you're in it, you see it as a continuous piece of work in a way that you're halfway through, but to a listener, each episode could be their first experience of that. So it's capturing both of those things. It's that continuity and that familiarity, but also that sense of welcome to the podcast if this is your first episode. So yeah,
it's true, isn't it? I think, and we do find that I get feedback from people where they might have listened to episode 12 as their first episode, and then they'll message me to say, oh my goodness, I've just discovered your podcast. And because they're evergreen, so they don't date, you can listen to it at any time. And that's very intentional from our perspective, that I want it to be useful and continuously useful. So when there's an episode on how to communicate your company's values, if you're not in that headspace right now, but in 6 months' time you are, there's an episode waiting for you. So that's a very intentional focus for me, not to do content that will date, but that will be continuously useful, whether you're listening to it the day it's released or 6 months or 2 years after it's published. I'm really keen to carry on doing that and having, it's good to have topics. I think it's good to draw on things which are, so hybrid working, for example, felt like now is the time to talk about hybrid working. So that's why I recorded that episode at the period of time that I recorded it, because I know from conversations with comms friends and clients that is what we're all working on right now.
Totally right. And as I remember, we shuffled the episode order around to accommodate that, right? And that's the great thing about having a regular publishing pulse, is that you may have content in the can, like we said, which is great. But then there may be a time when it's important that you wiggle that around to a different date, because actually this is really important right now and we really need to address this right now, because it's the conversation that people have got to have themselves in real time. And that's ideal. I think it's great to be in that position where we've got that flexibility, to pull content, wiggle it around and address what people's real needs are there and then.
Yeah.
How do you get a sense of that, Rachel? Because I think you're really adept at picking up on what's happening in the internal communications world and then feeding that content back out. How do you get a sense of that? Is that through feedback?
I'm always talking about internal comms, but more importantly, I'm always listening to my clients and comms friends. And, I've been blogging about internal communication for 12 years, and I use the search terms on my blog quite regularly I look at how have people got to the All Things IC blog and what are they searching for, and it helps me identify content gaps. So unfortunately, people were searching a while back, about employee deaths, and there was one line that I'd written on my blog about communicating, if employees die. And obviously during a pandemic, unfortunately, this has been a reality for lots of communicators where they've had to communicate really devastating news internally. So that led to me writing a blog post on how to communicate the death of an employee, because I was able to see and use the analytics to identify the gaps in terms of what are internal communicators looking for, what do they need help with, and how can I help bridge that gap in their knowledge by providing content. And I do the same for the podcast. So I'm looking at what conversations am I having with clients and comms friends and my inner circle particularly, which is my membership for senior level comms directors and heads of internal comms. And when you're at that sort of level, you can't often be seen to ask for help and admit that you don't know things or have an opportunity to connect with other people, which is why the inner circle exists. So I use all of those conversations to inform my planning in terms of what is top of mind right now and where are the gaps and how can I help?
No, that's brilliant, and that really comes through. And I think you do a great job of selecting really good content and really good topic areas, and
Thank you.
And that's such a strength.
We're going to take a short break, and when we come back, Debbie and I are going to close out episode 16 and the final episode of season 1. See you in a moment. Comms friends, I have a special offer for you. Because you are a listener of the Candid Comms podcast, you can save 10% off my range of online masterclasses. There's a variety of options to choose from. If you are brand new into an internal comms role, then my How to Create a 90-Day Plan is the course for you. If you're just starting out, then How to Be an Internal Communicator or an Introduction to Internal Communication Channels is the course you need. If you're working in-house and thinking about becoming a comms consultant, then How to Be a Comms Consultant Exploration is your online masterclass. And if, like many internal communicators, when I'm recording this in May 2021, are focused on hybrid working and communicating plans for your organisation, then the Internal Communicator's Guide to Hybrid Working is the course you need. All of these courses can be found at allthingsic.thinkific.com. And don't forget to use the code CANDIDCOMMS at the checkout to save 10%.
Welcome back. This is the final part of the final episode of season 1, and I got to say welcome back.
You did.
I really want to ask you, Rachel, about accessibility, because I know that's something that's really important to you, and it's something that we both work on when we produce all of your content. So tell me how accessibility fits with podcasting being a pure audio channel for you.
It's something that's really important to me. Particularly, I have a hearing loss, have 70% hearing loss, and I wear a hearing aid. So audio for me has always been a medium that I've struggled with. Because of the accessibility. I enjoy podcasts because I can pause, rewind any bits that I miss. And thinking about my own podcast, thinking about Candid Comms, it's been important to me to publish transcripts. So I'm really mindful of that. If other people struggle with audio as a means of communication, then I'm conscious of how do I make it accessible for them. So that manifests itself through publishing transcripts, but also the video clips that we do with the words on them. So the short 1-minute clips that we share on Instagram and Twitter around each episode. It's a work in progress for me. I'm constantly learning about accessibility, and there are mediums like Clubhouse, which are new and just launched, and I really struggle with that because I can't hear it. I miss so much of the audio, and because unlike a podcast, I can't pause it, I can't rewind it, and I can't catch up. Clubhouse doesn't feel like the right method for me, but podcasting, if you put the effort into making it accessible, should be available to everybody, and I am really conscious of that.
Yeah, I really appreciate that. And I know lots of people ask what would be the point of making a transcript of a podcast if it's meant to be audio. There's so many benefits, and it's not just accessibility. It's, enabling people to take pieces out of your content and enabling you to put that content onto your website and all of the help that gives you as well. But that accessibility thing is so important.
We talked about that, didn't we, about transcript, because I was unsure at the start what to publish with a podcast, because show notes for me have always been about, when I listen to a lot of podcasts, and whenever I go to show notes, I expect it to link to a piece of research that someone's referenced in their episode. I don't necessarily expect there to be a transcript. If there is, and I'm in the show notes because I've missed something, I haven't heard something correctly, or I want to replay it, that's really helpful for me because I can actually see the content. But you and I had that conversation as well, and I was saying, and I've been iterating as I've been going along. The last few episodes, particularly of this season 1, I've published full transcripts. And I remember the last one was like 4,000 words long. It's a whole thing.
Yeah.
It's like a mini book in its own right. And I remember us talking about that and me saying, should I make it shorter? Should I do timestamps? And we were discussing that actually, if it is a tricky subject, you might want to read a lot about it. And also from a search engine optimization, SEO perspective,
Yes.
it's a good thing to do.
Yeah, so it's not just sharing keywords, then it's key phrases, and it's having those phrases in different contexts that other people bring to your podcast in their interviews particularly. So that's really helpful.
I also think about, if you publish a transcript, why would someone listen to the podcast? But for me, I'm just keen to share that information, and it's up to internal communicators to decide how they want to access that content. It might be that audio doesn't feel like the right medium for them. At least if the content's there as a transcript, they still benefit from all the advice and guidance that I'm sharing through my podcast, but their communication style and their preference is to have it written. So hopefully it feels like it's working, and I can see from the stats that people are accessing the content and reading the transcript. So it feels like this is the right thing to do, so I'll keep on doing it.
Yeah, that's great. And I think you have to find out what's right for you, for your audience, for what you're trying to achieve. So it will vary from podcaster to podcaster how important that is to them. But yeah, I think it's right in your case that that's there. Brilliant. At this moment where we've just got to the end of season 1 and we're already planning season 2, which we're really excited about, what are your overall aims for the future of the podcast?
If I think about why I created Candid Comms and why I launched it, it was to be able to reach internal communicators wherever they are in the globe, and to have the opportunity to help them make decisions and make the right choices for their organisations wherever they are. And one of the things I'm really proud of is that it's definitely achieved those aims, because I can see from the stats that we have a truly global audience, and I'm really proud of that, to know that I'm in the earbuds of comms pros all around the globe. So for season 2, I would love to hear their voices. So you and I know, because we're planning at the moment, but some of my guests for season 2, it's important to me to amplify the voices of internal communicators, not just here in the UK, but around the globe. So part of my planning for season 2 is enabling that to happen. So success for me to get to the end of season 2 would be to have heard from internal communicators who've got fantastic stories to share and great tips and advice to help other internal communicators.
Yeah, amazing. I can't wait for that to happen. And I think I remember saying at the beginning, one of the lovely things, the most rewarding things, is seeing those countries light up when you get listeners in different countries. It's super, isn't it? Yeah.
We talked about doing cocktails, didn't we? We talked about
That's right. Yeah.
having a map and being able to have a cocktail from each of the origin countries.
Exactly.
We didn't do that, did we? We should have done that.
There's time.
There is time. But I am really proud of that, because you get different perspectives as well.
Yeah.
And I think what fascinates me is understanding what people are taking away, or hearing what people are taking away as a result of listening to the podcast, and spotting those global differences and spotting what really resonates with people, and the difference of opinion that you get around the world about internal comms. So I'm constantly learning, and I'm really open to that, and hearing views from listeners about what's resonating and what they're going to try out in their own place of work, wherever they may be listening from. Yeah,
it's fascinating, isn't it? And really rewarding. Well, finally, the $1 million question. As an experienced and successful podcaster, I'd like to know what you would tell somebody else who's thinking about podcasting. One thing they need to know, one thing they can do, and one thing they ought to think about.
I see what you did there. I love it. So something I think you need to know if you're thinking about creating a podcast is, what's the intention behind it? So what's the problem that you're trying to solve, or how does it fit into other work you may be doing? So for me, how it fits in with my blog and with my masterclasses and client work. So be really clear about what's the gap, what's the problem that you're trying to solve. Something to do is to do your research. So who else is doing something in the space? And also, there's 2 bits for me in that. 2 things to do. Do your research, who else is doing what, but also, what do you need kit-wise? So I remember having conversations with you around, I've still got my microphones, my Blue Yeti microphone and my Snowball microphones from my original podcast all those years ago. What else do you need? So I think that's something that's really important, because you don't need a lot of equipment. As we're recording right now, I've got a pop shield, which is £7 on Amazon, and I've got a device that plugs the microphone into my phone. I'm recording off voice memos. You don't need to have a heck of a lot of equipment. So that's something to do, is do your research around the kit that you need, and it's probably less than you actually realise. And then something to think about is measuring success. So if you don't want to have, and I'm going to use the lovely phrase pod fade, if you don't want to have pod fade, then what does your measure of success look like? How do you know if this is worth continuing to do? So I think that's something to think about up front. And you were really great in challenging me up front in terms of, what does success look like and what do you want to be thinking about? Giving the space and time to collect your thoughts before launching into a podcast, I think, is the right thing to do, because if you're not sure, and I say this when people are thinking about starting a blog, if you're not sure whether that particular topic is the right thing to blog about, write 10 headlines. Yeah. And then write 10 more, and then write 10 more. And if you think, and I say this as a blogger who's been writing for 12 years on internal comms, if you can't think of a new topic to write about within that niche, then that's not the right topic for you. Yeah. So I think being really intentional around the topics that you want to record, if you think, actually, I'm going to run out of ideas, then that's probably not the right medium for you.
That's brilliant advice. Yeah, I think that's brilliant advice. Awesome. Well, thank you very much. That was super. A really good summary of really critical things. I love your emphasis on how intentional you've been about all those things through making the podcast. And I think that's what's made it such a success. So yeah, congratulations again. It's been brilliant.
Thank you very much. I'm looking forward to season 2. So thank you so much to you for all of your hard work and for correcting all of my missteps and cutting out all the police sirens when I record in central London.
Those are my favourite bits.
I think you have so many clips of me going, sorry Debbie, Debbie.
Yeah, and the sound of you writing notes in the middle. Those are my favourite bits. Yeah.
Sorry. So I'm going to close our episode by saying thank you to you listeners for tuning in season 1. It's been a total joy to hear what you're doing differently as a result of listening to Candid Comms. I will be back. We will take a very short break, and then season 2 will be back in your earbuds. In the meantime, do listen back if you've missed any episodes of season 1. If you have any ideas for topics you would like me to cover in season 2, please do get in touch. As ever, you can find me on Twitter at allthingsic, find me on Instagram, Rachel allthingsic, look me up on LinkedIn, Rachel Miller, or you can send me a message via allthingsic.com, and you can find show notes for this episode at allthingsic.com/podcast. And for the final time this season, listeners, remember, what happens inside is reflected outside. See you again soon.